Apply this color over the flower, leaving a few spaces of white on your painting where the flower's highlights are. Work around and beneath the highlights and leave the edges of the front petals white to show depth. Using the tip of your brush, move this very light pink shade right around the tips of the petals, blocking in the initial layer of color. Next, re-wet the lemon yellow watercolor. We'll be using this light, bright yellow shade to paint in the second tulip. Using the line drawing as your guide, work the paint onto the petals, again leaving areas of highlights. Make sure you paint in the small area of the petal that's overlapped by this first flower's stem. As you work your way into the center of the tulip, notice some areas of highlights that go right through the center of the tulip petals. This first layer of paint sets the stage for coming back into the blossom with darker shades and shadows. So for now, your tulip will look fairly one-dimensional. After we finish filling in all of this yellow color, we'll let the petals and leaves dry. That way we'll be able to add darker shades without the colors bleeding together. This may take a few minutes, and you can use a hairdryer to speed up the process. Now that our first layer of paint is no longer damp, we can begin working over the top of these dry layers to create rich, deep color. Beginning with quinacridone coral, make a stronger mixture of paint by adding less water and really working the paint into your brush. The paint should not be dry or sticky, but it should flow with a stronger intensity of color. Start with the outer edge of the petal and trace around, adding this brilliant shade of red. Move into the interior areas of the flower and pull the color down into the center. A lot of the darkest colors of the flower will be on these interior areas and near the bottom of the tulip. To add markings to the petals, use the point of your brush to add some stripes along the length of your flower, varying the thickness of the stripes and pulling color along the contours of the petals. Once you have added all of this vibrant color, rinse your brush and let it dry slightly. Using this clean, damp brush, blend some of the areas along the outer edges of the flower to soften up some of the darker stripes. Once your brush picks up a little pigment from the painting, trace along the tops of the flowers where your white highlights are to cover the pencil marks. Just do a little blending while the paint is still wet, starting with small areas and then really looking at your painting to make sure you're happy with the result. We'll be using a similar technique to add contrast to the yellow flower. However, mixing a stronger shade of yellow will not really give the same amount of contrast as we were able to achieve with the quinacridone coral. The yellow paint simply does not have the same range of values, so we'll be mixing a new color for these darker areas. Begin by moving a small amount of quinacridone coral to an empty well on your palette. Add an equal amount of the cobalt green and you will make a gray-violet color. To that shade, add some of the lemon yellow watercolor. The resulting color is a warm brown yellow. You can see this mixture is quite yellow, but it's a lot darker and less bright than the lemon yellow alone. Using this mixture, begin filling in the bottom areas of the flower, where there is shadow from overlapping petals. After you have placed the lower shadows, pull this paint into the center of the flower, following the lines that move up through the center of the flower. Work around the white highlights and be sure to leave a lot of areas of yellow. Work slowly to strike the right balance of yellow so that your flower doesn't look brown, but retains a lot of that bright lemon tone. On the white areas, come back in with a very light application of lemon yellow. Mix your paint with a lot of water so that you'll have a very soft tone to make these white areas a soft, subtle yellow. Finally, use a damp brush to blend in some of the shadow areas near the bottom of the flower. You can pull out extra paint by using a dry brush if necessary. While both of the flowers dry, we'll mix a dark shade of green for the foliage of the plant. Move a small amount of quinacridone coral to an empty well on your palette. Add a larger amount of cobalt green and continue adding this color until you've mixed a dark gray-violet. Next, add a touch of yellow to brighten this mixture. Adjust the color until you see more green than red or yellow. Now you've made a dark green neutral shade that can be used for shadows and the undersides of leaves. Load your brush with this color and apply paint on the undersides of the leaves, where the line drawing indicates that the leaf is bending or twisting. You can see this darker shade adds contrast with the lighter color on top of the leaves. For the leaf in the foreground, apply color along the bottom. Next, paint in a darker tone where the stem overlaps the leaves. Using a damp brush, blend this area with water. At the top of the leaf, add some darker tone for the details of the leaf. Continue adding shadows and the center veins of the leaf throughout the painting. For the stems, use the darker color to add a shadow on one side of the stem, running color from top to bottom along the stem. For the second flower, place the shadow on the same side of the stem. Now you have three tones, a dark shadow, a mid-range green on the leaves, and a white highlight. For the highlight that runs along the edge of the leaves, mix a very light green wash by adding water to the cobalt green paint. Use this color to fill in the white areas. You may feel like you don't have very much paint on your brush. That's okay, we're just adding the slightest touch of color to these areas. The highlights should be the lightest part of the foliage. Now that the leaves and stems are finished, we'll add a few darker strokes of paint to finish up these flowers. Come in and deepen up the color on the bottom of the flower with a little more quinacridone coral. Working over dry areas of paint will really bring up the intensity of the red tones. For the yellow tulip, adjust your brown mixture so that it's slightly deeper and trace over some of the areas where the petals overlap to add the suggestion of a shadow. Select just a few areas to apply this darker tone and enhance the shape of the flower. Bright colors combined with rich green make a brilliant statement on tulip blossoms in this garden-inspired painting. Thank you for painting along with me. I hope you enjoyed the satisfaction of creating your own art with this series of Learn to Paint step-by-step painting projects. As you continue your creative journey, look for our other Learn to Paint step-by-step painting projects at a retailer nearest you. Happy painting!